On this journey through time, we're going to clear up the mystery of the Middle Ages with 50 amazing little-known facts that'll blow your mind. Forget what you think you know, because today, we're uncovering the surprising truth about hygiene, food, strange customs, scientific breakthroughs, and art in a time that was anything but dull. Before you settle in, take a second to like this video and hit subscribe. Then drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always cool to see who's joining us from all over the world. I'm Nighttime Scribe, and my goal is to take you on a story that helps you unwind and drift off to a great night's sleep. First up, let's talk about hygiene and health, and here's the first surprise. Were medieval people really as filthy as the stories say? The answer is a big no. To start, the idea that they didn't bathe is a myth. In fact, the Middle Ages, especially the high and late periods, had public baths all over the place. These weren't just for cleaning up. They were social hubs. Imagine spas where folks bathed, caught up with friends, and even made business deals. Towns big and small had bathhouses. And not just in Europe, the Islamic world had an even more advanced and widespread tradition of public baths, which later influenced the West. Also, saunas were popular, especially in Northern Europe. They were like medieval versions of the ancient Roman baths, using steam to clean the body. The idea that people never washed is an exaggeration. They probably didn't shower every day, but that was more about practical lifestyle reasons than not caring about cleanliness or lacking the means. And yes, soap was real. It wasn't like the bar soap we use now, but it was made from wood ash, mixed with animal or vegetable fats. They used it to wash clothes and, of course, their bodies. People also used fragrant herbs and oils to mask odors and stay fresh. So even though their methods and routines were different, personal hygiene was definitely a concern in the Middle Ages. Next, let's talk about clothing and laundry. How often did people wash their clothes back then, and with what? How often they washed depended a lot on social class and the type of clothing. Outer layers, usually heavy wools, silks, or velvets, were pricey and tough to clean, so they'd mostly brush off dust and air them out. Deep washing was rare for these, but undergarments like linen shirts or tunics, which touched the skin, got washed more regularly. Wealthier folks had soap, though it wasn't always affordable for everyone. For peasants and the less fortunate, some interesting laundry methods were used. To get out tough stains, they often relied on specific solutions. One common mix was wood ash and water, which made an alkaline lye strong enough to break down grease and dirt. This lye could even be turned into soap by mixing it with oil. And here's a surprising fact. Urine was also used. Human urine, especially when aged, contains ammonia, which is a powerful cleaner and bleach. Mixed with ash, it made an even stronger laundry solution. Sounds gross, but it was a cheap and effective option before modern detergents. After washing, clothes were rinsed in rivers or streams. People also used aromatic herbs to give freshly cleaned clothes a nice scent. Laundry was hard work and used some strange methods by today's standards, but it was an important and regular chore. Now for the third point, which always gets people curious: dental care. How did people take care of their teeth in the Middle Ages without modern toothbrushes, toothpaste, or dentists? The truth is, even without our tech, they weren't totally helpless. Oral hygiene mattered. They used herbs with antiseptic and refreshing qualities like mint, rosemary, or parsley, chewing them or rubbing them on teeth and gums to clean and freshen breath. Sage leaves were also popular for their whitening and cleansing effects. People scrubbed their teeth and gums with rough cloths, small bits of linen or wool, sometimes dampened with water or herbal mixtures, to polish teeth and remove food bits. It was basic but somewhat effective. Another surprising fact: wine. Yep, sometimes wine was used as a kind of mouthwash. Its acidity was thought to clean teeth and kill bacteria. That said, the sugars in wine could also cause cavities over time, so it was a bit of a double-edged sword. Tooth extraction was done too, though with limited tools and knowledge. Sometimes if things got bad, people turned to amulets or prayers. So while modern dentistry didn't exist, folks found ways to care for their teeth with what they had. Moving on to personal hygiene again, the fourth point is about perfumes and deodorants. If people didn't bathe as often as we do, how did they handle body odor? That's where fragrances and sachets came in. Despite its challenges, the Middle Ages had creative ways to fight bad smells. Perfumes made from essential oils of flowers and herbs were popular with the wealthy. Rose, lavender, rosemary, mint, sandalwood, and musk were favorites. These weren't to cover gross smells, but to complement cleanliness, freshen up, and show status. Everyday folks used aromatic sachets, small linen or silk pouches filled with dried herbs, spices, and scented flowers. They'd sew these into clothes, wear them around their necks or waists, or stash them in closets and bedding. Lavender, chamomile, clove, cinnamon, and citrus peels were common ingredients. These sachets served two purposes: to scent clothes and surroundings, and act like personal deodorants, gently releasing fragrance all day. Homes were scented by burning herbs or resins, and fresh aromatic branches were scattered on floors to smell nice and keep bugs away. So even though modern deodorants didn't exist, people found ways to stay and smell as fresh as possible. Now let's talk about a less glamorous but very real part of medieval life: lice and fleas. Living with these tiny pests was common, and not just for the lower classes. While people did practice hygiene, they didn't have the parasite control methods we have today. Without hot running water in every home, the difficulty of frequent laundry, and the close quarters between people and animals, lice and fleas spread easily. This wasn't a sign of extreme dirtiness, but just a result of the living conditions back then. So how did they deal with it? They had different methods. Some worked better than others. For lice, people often used fine-toothed combs made of bone or wood to comb them out regularly. They also applied herbal ointments and lotions with insect-killing properties like pyrethrum extract or castor oil on their hair and bodies. Sometimes, especially in monasteries, heads were shaved, not only for religious reasons but also for hygiene. As for fleas, which infested humans, animals, and homes, mattresses and bedding were cleaned regularly. People burned aromatic herbs like mint or lavender indoors, believing the smoke would drive fleas away. They even used simple traps, like sticky cloths or bowls filled with water and soap, to catch them. It was a constant struggle, but medieval people were used to these unwanted guests. They just accepted them as part of life and developed ways to keep them in check. Moving on to the sixth point, medieval medicine. When most of us think about it, bloodletting probably comes to mind first. But the truth is, medieval medicine was more complex and, in some ways, surprisingly advanced for its time. Bloodletting was common based on the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. The idea was that illness came from an imbalance of these humors, and bloodletting was supposed to restore balance. But that wasn't all they did. Herbal medicine was a big part of treatment. Monks, and women in particular, were experts on plants and their healing powers. They used a wide range of herbs to treat everything from headaches and digestion issues to infections and wounds. They made teas, ointments, poultices, and elixirs from natural ingredients like chamomile, valerian, garlic, and ginger. This knowledge was passed down through generations and kept safe in monasteries, where old medical texts were copied and studied. Surprisingly, basic surgery also existed. Barber surgeons performed tooth extractions, set broken bones, cauterized wounds, and even did amputations in extreme cases. They didn't have modern anesthesia or sterilization, so these procedures were painful and risky, but often necessary. Pain was managed with alcohol or certain herbs. Medicine back then also had a spiritual side, with prayers and relics playing a role, but that went alongside practical treatments and observation. So medieval medicine was a mix of early science, folk tradition, and faith. Now, while we've talked about public baths, it's important not to romanticize the situation. Let's move to the seventh point: how waste was handled day to day. This is where things get less pleasant with chamber pots and street waste. For most people, especially those in private homes without sewer systems, chamber pots were the go-to. These simple containers were used at night or when it wasn't convenient to go outside to a cesspit or public latrine. The real issue came after disposing of the waste. In many medieval cities, it was common to just dump chamber pots out the window into the streets or open drainage ditches. As you can imagine, this made the environment dirty, smelly, and helped spread disease. There wasn't the public health awareness we have now, and getting rid of waste was a big challenge for growing cities. Other trash, kitchen scraps, and animal droppings from livestock kept within city limits also ended up in streets, alleys, and public squares. Some places had rules to keep streets cleaner and hired street sweepers or let pigs and other animals help clean up, but the problem was huge. This shows us that medieval life mixed clever ideas with some serious sanitation challenges. Next, the eighth point: personal hygiene among the nobility. While public baths and general habits were common for everyone, how did the wealthy handle cleaning? The nobility clearly had big advantages. They had much better and more frequent access to bathing. For them, bathing wasn't a public event but a private routine. While not necessarily daily by today's standards, they had portable wooden or metal tubs, often lined with cloth or sheets for comfort, filled with hot water carried in by servants. The bathwater was usually scented with aromatic herbs or essential oils, making the experience more pleasant and luxurious. Nobles used higher quality soaps regularly, often imported or made with refined recipes. They also had clean towels and linen undergarments that could be changed often, which made a big difference. Their outer clothes, though not washed all the time, were brushed, aired out, and sometimes scented with perfumes or powders to keep them fresh. The main difference between nobles and commoners was frequency, resources, and privacy. While peasants washed in rivers, public fountains, or with buckets at home when they could, and wore coarse, hard-to-clean fabrics, the nobility could maintain a higher standard of cleanliness thanks to their wealth and staff. This helped them not only stay cleaner, but also show their social status, since cleanliness itself was a sign of power. Now, the ninth point: common diseases of the Middle Ages. Sure, the Black Death is the first thing that comes to mind, but many other illnesses were widespread and treated in ways that seem strange today. The Black Death, which hit Europe in the mid-1300s, was devastating, killing a large portion of the population. But before and after it, people dealt with lots of other diseases. Dysentery and diarrhea were common because of bad water and poor sanitation. Respiratory illnesses like pneumonia and tuberculosis thrived in cramped, poorly heated homes. Skin diseases, from scabies to leprosy, and fevers of unknown cause were frequent too. So, how were these illnesses treated? Treatments were a mix of hands-on experience, superstition, and, as mentioned, heavy reliance on herbal remedies for fevers. For example, they used herbal teas that made you sweat or applied cold compresses. For stomach issues, natural laxatives or astringent herbs were common go-tos. Bloodletting was used for just about everything, from headaches to high fevers, based on the belief in balancing the four humors. Diet also played a big role. Certain foods were thought to heat or cool the body and were avoided depending on the illness. For wounds and broken bones, Herbal ointments were applied to prevent infection, though they didn't really understand bacteria, and limbs were stabilized with splints. Basic surgery was done too, like draining abscesses or removing external tumors. On top of all that, prayer, amulets, and pilgrimages to holy sites were seen as essential treatments, since many believed diseases were divine punishment or caused by evil spirits. So medieval medicine was really a blend of observation, belief, and creativity in the fight against illness. Now on to the 10th point: healers and sorcerers. Back then, the line between what we'd call medicine and what was pure superstition or magic was pretty blurry. In many communities, especially rural ones, the most accessible health helpers weren't university-trained doctors who were rare and expensive, but local healers. These were often women knowledgeable in herbal medicine, or what later got labeled as witches, a term that eventually got a bad reputation. These healers had extensive knowledge of herbs and plant-based remedies. They made ointments, potions, and teas to treat all kinds of ailments, relying on wisdom passed down through generations. While their methods lacked modern scientific proof, they often eased symptoms or cured minor issues. But alongside this practical know-how, superstition was common. Healers often used rituals, amulets, prayers, and spells in their treatments. People believed diseases could be caused by curses, the evil eye, or harmful spirits. So healing meant not just physical remedies, but also magical or spiritual help. For many, there was no contradiction here. The physical and spiritual worlds were deeply connected. Sorcerers focused more on fortune-telling, charms, and influencing luck, but sometimes their work overlapped with healing, offering cures for mysterious illnesses or those thought caused by supernatural forces. This mix, where one person could be both an herbal expert and a magic practitioner, shows how science and mysticism naturally coexisted in medieval thinking. Switching gears, let's look at the peasant diet, a key part of medieval life. The stars here were bread, porridge, and cereals. For most medieval people, the diet was simple and mostly based on what they grew themselves. Cereals like wheat, barley, rye, and oats were the staples. From these came bread, not the refined white bread we know today, but a dense, dark, rustic loaf made from whole grain flour that kept much of the grain intact. This bread was the main source of calories and daily energy. People ate it with almost everything, often using it to soak up stews and broths. Porridge, made by cooking ground cereals like oats, barley, or millet in water or milk, was another common meal. It was a typical breakfast and a hearty option, especially for kids and the elderly. Sometimes it was boosted with legumes, herbs, or bits of meat if they had it. Meat itself was a luxury. Legumes like lentils, peas, and broad beans, along with seasonal veggies, rounded out the diet, but mostly peasants got their energy from cereals, a simple yet effective way to power through hard fieldwork. Now, in contrast, let's talk about the noble diet, the 12th point. It was a totally different story. Plenty of meat, exotic spices, and feasts that showed off wealth and power. For nobles, meat wasn't a treat, but a regular staple and a status symbol. They ate large amounts of game like deer, wild boar, hares, and birds from their own lands or private preserves. Farm animals like oxen, pigs, and poultry were also on the menu. Their diet was so heavy on protein and fat that it would seem extremely rich by today's standards. What really set the noble table apart was the lavish use of exotic spices. Pepper, saffron, cinnamon, clove, nutmeg, and ginger came from faraway places and were super expensive, affordable only to the wealthiest. These spices weren't just for flavor. They were a way to flaunt wealth and sophistication, showing connections to far-flung trade routes. Banquets were huge events. More than just meals, they were chances to display power, seal alliances, and entertain. Multiple courses were served with elaborate presentations, like peacocks served with their feathers, pies hiding live birds inside, and sugar sculptures. Wine and beer flowed freely, and music, minstrels, and jesters added to the entertainment. The noble table was a world of abundance and style, a clear contrast to the simple peasant diet. Finally, on to point 13, wine and beer. In the Middle Ages, these drinks weren't just for fun. They were often safer to drink than water. Why? It comes down to fermentation. Without modern water treatment, rivers and wells were often contaminated with bacteria that caused diseases like dysentery, which were common and dangerous. Drinking untreated water was risky. That's where wine and beer came in. The fermentation process created an environment that killed many harmful bacteria. Yeasts consumed sugars and produced alcohol, which, even in low amounts, acted as a natural disinfectant, making these drinks safer to consume. Also, the boiling of the wort in beer making and the natural acidity of wine helped kill harmful germs. So even without knowing about microbiology, medieval people intuitively understood that these drinks were safer than untreated water. Kids even drank very low alcohol versions of beer, almost like a liquid food. That's why wine and beer weren't just drinks to enjoy or get tipsy on. They were essential parts of daily meals and key to staying healthy in a time when clean water was hard to come by. Now let's jump into point 14, condiments and spices. Today, spices are just everyday kitchen staples, but back in the Middle Ages, they were rare, expensive luxuries and symbols of status. Spices were more than just flavorings. They were like currency and a sign of wealth, especially in elite cooking. Take pepper, for example. It was so valuable it was often used as payment. That's where the saying, "worth an arm and a leg," comes from. Pepper came all the way from India, traveling long, risky, and costly routes that made it outrageously expensive. Saffron, known as red gold, was another prized spice from the Middle East and Mediterranean. It added a unique flavor and bright color to food, and was believed to have medicinal benefits too. Harvesting saffron was hard work. Thousands of tiny stigmas from the saffron crocus were needed to make a small amount, which justified its high price. Cinnamon, with its sweet and warm scent, came from Sri Lanka and parts of Asia. Along with clove and nutmeg, these spices turned even simple dishes into exotic treats. Spices weren't just for cooking, they were also used in medicine, perfumes, and religious ceremonies. The spice trade fueled major routes like the Silk Road and drove much of the exploration that followed. So when you think about medieval food, remember that spices were more than ingredients. They were treasures connecting Europe to the wider world. Moving on to point 15, food preservation methods. Without refrigerators or freezers, surviving long winters or shortages meant knowing how to store food well. Salting, smoking, and pickling were key. Salting was probably the most common and effective way. Salt dries out food, stopping bacteria and mold from growing. Meat, especially pork and fish, was packed in salt and stored in barrels to last for months or even years, keeping a steady protein supply. Salted cod, for example, was a staple in many places. Smoking was also popular, especially for meats and fish. Hanging food over slow-burning fires dried it out, and the smoke chemicals preserved it while giving a unique flavor. Sausages, hams, and some fish were smoked to last longer. Pickling and fermentation played important roles too. Vegetables, meats, or fish were soaked in acidic liquids like vinegar, sometimes with herbs and spices, which created a hostile environment for microbes. Pickles not only preserved food, but added flavor, making them a great way to store veggies and small bits of meat or fish. These simple methods were the backbone of medieval food security, helping communities keep their harvests and catches fresh all year. Now, let's talk about fasting and Lent, a crucial part of medieval eating. Religion had a huge influence on what, when, and how people ate. The Catholic Church, central to medieval life, set strict fasting rules. The most famous was Lent, the 40 days before Easter, when eating meat, poultry, and sometimes dairy and eggs was banned. This meant people relied on fish, veggies, legumes, and grains. But Lent wasn't the only time. Fasting also happened on Fridays each week, and often on Wednesdays and Saturdays too. Other religious feasts and vigils came with food restrictions as well. For many, meat was only eaten less than half the year. These fasts were about penance and spiritual cleansing, not health. They were acts of devotion. But fasting sparked creativity in cooking, leading to elaborate Lenten recipes using fish, vegetables, and spices that tried to match the richness of meat dishes. So religion didn't just shape spiritual life. It shaped the medieval table, pushing cooks to adapt and innovate in a world where faith and food were deeply connected. Now on to point 17, utensils and table manners. Get ready. Eating with your hands was the norm. Forget the Victorian image of a fancy table with forks, knives, and spoons for every dish. In the Middle Ages, most people didn't have personal cutlery. Hands were the main eating tools. Most meals were eaten straight from shared dishes or using thick slices of hard bread called trenchers as plates and scoops. Food came as stews, pottages, and large chunks, easy to pick up with fingers. At best, a diner might have a personal knife for cutting meat and other tasks. Spoons were mostly for soups and porridges, but weren't common at every meal. Forks were rare. They came from Byzantium early on, but were seen as odd or overly fancy and didn't become popular until the Renaissance. But eating with your hands didn't mean no manners. Strict rules existed, especially among nobles. People washed their hands before and after meals. It was rude to stick dirty fingers in shared dishes, slurp loudly, or talk with your mouth full. People cleaned fingers with bread or cloth. Sharing food was common and a sign of friendship and trust. So while dining styles varied, etiquette was very much alive, adapted to the tools and customs of the day. Finally, point 18, the importance of bread. In the Middle Ages, bread was way more than just food. It was literally the centerpiece of the table, used for eating, as a plate, and as a utensil. As we saw with peasants, bread was the main food for nearly everyone, though quality varied. For common folks, it was the main calorie source and easiest energy. But bread's role went beyond that. One fascinating use was as a plate. Trenchers were thick slices of stale bread, often from the day before, used to hold meats, stews, and other dishes. The bread soaked up juices and sauces, becoming soft and flavorful. After the meal, these juice-soaked trenchers were either eaten by diners or, in noble households, collected and given to servants, the poor, or even dogs, a practical way to make the most of every bit of food. Bread also served as a handy tool, pushing food on the plate, wiping sticky fingers, or picking up small bites from the table. It was like an extension of the hand, adapting to dining needs in a time when individual utensils were rare. So bread wasn't just nutrition, it was a versatile table tool that showed how resourceful people were. Now we come to point 19, a sweeter subject, medieval sweets and desserts. Forget fancy multi-layered cakes. Back then, desserts were mostly made with honey, fruits, and the first simple confections, which, despite their simplicity, were highly valued. Cane sugar was an extreme luxury, imported from far-off places and only affordable for the highest nobility. It was often used more like medicine or a spice than as a sweetener. Honey was the main sweetener. It flavored drinks, desserts, and even some savory dishes. Besides taste, it was prized for its supposed healing qualities. Fruits were the go-to natural dessert, fresh when in season or dried and candied to enjoy year-round. They were an important part of meals. Apples, pears, grapes, cherries, and plums were common, while dried fruits like dates and figs, often imported, were treats. People ate them plain, roasted, stewed, or baked into simple pies and tarts. Early sweets were quite different from today's candies. They included dried fruit and honey treats, often spiced. For example, preserves, fruits cooked in thick honey syrup, were popular, as were small honey, flour, and spice snacks that were the ancestors of some cookies or biscuits. One notable dessert was blancmange, a sweet pudding made from milk, rice, or almonds, sugar if available, or honey, and sometimes shredded chicken breast, a combo that sounds strange now. So while medieval desserts weren't as varied or fancy as today's, the sweetness of honey and freshness of fruit were the main delights. To wrap up the food section, point 20 is the medieval garden. This wasn't just a leisure spot, it was crucial for food and health. Everything grown had culinary or medicinal uses. Castles, monasteries, and many peasant homes had gardens essential to daily life. Gardens weren't just for looks, they were necessary. Vegetables were key, especially during fasting or to supplement grains. Cabbage, onions, garlic, carrots, sometimes purple or yellow, parsnips, peas, broad beans, and lettuces were grown for stews, soups, and simple salads. The medieval garden was also like a pharmacy. Aromatic and medicinal herbs were carefully grown. Mint, rosemary, sage, thyme, and parsley flavored food and were prized for healing. Chamomile for calming teas, valerian for sleep, calendula for wounds, and henbane for digestion were common examples. Monks especially were skilled at growing and using these plants in medicinal gardens or herbariums. Fruit trees, apple, pear, plum, added vitamins and sweetness. Small berry bushes were common too. So the medieval garden was a self-sufficient microcosm, where every plant had a purpose, showing how deeply people's lives were connected to the land. Now let's leave food behind and move to point 21, marriage. In the Middle Ages, marriage was mostly an economic and social contract rather than a romantic choice. The modern idea of marriage based on love and personal choice hardly existed for most people. For nobles and the wealthy, marriage was a key strategic tool. It secured political alliances, protected property, united families, settled disputes, and increased wealth or power. Marriages were often arranged in childhood, with negotiations lasting years, and involving dowries and prenuptial agreements, covering every financial detail. Personal feelings took a back seat to family and dynasty interests. For peasants and lower classes, marriage was also practical and economic, a partnership for work and raising children. Joining two families meant more hands for the land, combining small farms or mutual survival. Having children, especially sons, was vital for carrying on the family and labor needs. While affection might exist, marriage was mostly about necessity and convenience, often requiring parental or feudal approval. The church insisted marriage be lifelong and monogamous, but secular laws prioritized practical concerns. Romantic love, as we know it, would develop more in literature and later shape marriage ideals. Now on to point 22, gender roles. Medieval life had very different expectations for women and men, shaped by social status and the norms of the time. Noble women's main role was to secure heirs and strengthen alliances through marriage. They were trained in managing large households, which in castles was a huge job, and raising children. Some noble women, especially when their husbands were away at war or on crusade, held significant power, managing estates, defending castles, and even taking part in politics. Still, their public roles were limited, and their value was often tied to childbearing and obedience to male relatives. Peasant women shared tough field work with men, planting, harvesting, caring for animals, and handled domestic chores, cooking, spinning, weaving, child care, and home upkeep. Their lives were full of hard labor. They were crucial to family survival. Though society was male-dominated, their contributions were essential. Noblemen were trained as warriors and lords, skilled in military tactics, horsemanship, and governance. They defended lands, served their kings or lords, and kept order. They also handled estate management, justice, and political representation. Honor, courage, and loyalty were their core values. Peasant men made up the backbone of farming, spending their days plowing, planting, harvesting, building, and maintaining infrastructure. They joined local militias when needed and led their households. Physical strength was key, and their lives followed the cycles of nature and feudal duties. Overall, men and women had clear, important roles in medieval society and economy, though there were big differences in power, independence, and opportunity. Now we're diving into a delicate and often misunderstood topic: childhood in the Middle Ages. How were kids seen and treated back then? The common idea is that they were just treated like tiny adults, but the truth is more complicated. From a young age, children, especially in lower classes, were seen as part of the family's workforce. There was no concept of a long adolescence or carefree childhood like we have today. By the time they were 7, or sometimes even younger, peasant kids were already doing age-appropriate chores like tending animals, gathering firewood, or helping out in the fields. Noble children, on the other hand, might be sent off as pages or companions to other courts to learn manners, horsemanship, or needlework. But this didn't mean parents didn't love them or recognize childhood as a special stage. Parents named their kids, mourned their deaths, and cared deeply about their futures. The church also valued children's innocence and pushed for early baptism. So, while medieval childhood didn't look like ours in terms of legal protections or long periods of play, kids were still important members of society with roles tied closely to their family's economic and social needs. If you're watching this now, I hope you're already subscribed to the channel. I'm Nighttime Scribe, and I want to build a big community of people who love the night and the pursuit of knowledge. Thousands from all over the world are connected by that deep desire to learn more, understand themselves better, and live a fuller life. I always say this: knowing history is key to not repeating past mistakes. So take a second, subscribe, and share this video with your fellow knowledge seekers. And hey, if you're feeling generous, consider sending a super thanks to this humble creator. Anyway, I'm truly grateful you're sharing this moment with me. Now, let's keep going. We're back on the medieval journey now at point 24, festivals and celebrations. In a tough world of hard work and harsh living, festivals were essential. Medieval life was marked by a blend of religious and pagan celebrations. The Catholic Church shaped much of the yearly calendar with its feast days. Christmas and Easter were the biggest, celebrated with solemn masses, fasting beforehand, and big feasts afterward. But there were lots of other saints' days, holy obligations, and processions that broke up the work routine. These religious events gave people a chance to gather, join communal rituals, and often enjoy more food and drink than usual. Yet many Christian festivals overlapped or blended with older pagan traditions, especially those tied to farming cycles and seasons. For instance, the winter solstice, a pagan festival of light and rebirth, was folded into Christmas. Similarly, spring fertility festivals mixed with Easter celebrations. The church didn't always wipe out these old customs, but often adapted them, letting people keep traditions under a Christian framework. These festivals were joyful breaks from daily hardships, featuring music, dancing, games, simple plays, and lots of food and drink. They were crucial for community bonding and gave people a much-needed chance to rest and celebrate. Festivals often set the rhythm of the year, from planting to harvest, marking times for work and for rejoicing. Now, how did medieval folks have fun? Point 25 is all about games and entertainment, a vital escape from daily grind. You'll find everything from chess and dice to jousts and troubadours. Among the nobles and even some common folks, board games were a favorite pastime for exercising the mind. Chess, brought to Europe from the Islamic world, was especially prized by the nobility as a strategic game simulating warfare. Dice and other gambling games were everywhere, though the church often frowned on them because of the gambling. People also played medieval backgammon and versions of checkers. Outside the noble halls, entertainment was more physical and spectacular. Jousts and tournaments were the highlights of chivalric fun. These events weren't just military contests, but grand social occasions that drew crowds. Knights showed off their skills, strength, and honor in mock battles, both training and displays of wealth. Falconry and hunting with dogs were also popular elite pastimes. For all classes, music and storytelling were vital sources of enjoyment. Troubadours and minstrels traveled from village to village and castle to castle, singing songs, reciting epic poems, telling tales of love and chivalry, and performing acrobatics and juggling. They were the mass media of the time, spreading news and entertainment even to remote places. Religious festivals and markets were also big events for dancing, popular games, and simple plays, often with religious or moral messages. So far from being grim and joyless, the Middle Ages offered a rich variety of games and entertainment that reflected its diverse society. Next up, point 26, clothing. Medieval dress wasn't just practical, it was a visual language. Materials, colors, and styles revealed the wearer's status, job, and wealth. Fabrics varied a lot by social class. Most people, peasants, wore coarse, durable fabrics like wool and linen. Wool was warm and tough, great for Europe's climate, while linen, lighter and cooler, was used for undergarments and summer wear. These fabrics were usually natural colors or dyed with local plants, resulting in shades like ochre, brown, and gray. In contrast, nobles and the rich wore luxurious, often imported materials like silk, velvet, and brocade. These fabrics were expensive and hard to get, making them clear status symbols. Their clothes were often elaborate, decorated with embroidery, fur, and jewels. Color also mattered. Bright, lasting dyes were costly and reserved for the wealthy. Reds made from cochineal or madder, and blues from woad or indigo were prestigious colors. Darker, earthier tones were common among lower classes. Sumptuary laws also dictated which fabrics and colors each social class could wear, reinforcing the social hierarchy. The symbolism went beyond just color and material. The cut of a garment, the length of sleeves or trains, and accessories like hats or belts all sent clear signals about social rank, profession, and even marital status. For example, an elaborate pointed hat might signal a noblewoman, while a simple wool cap would mark someone as a peasant. Clothing was basically a form of public identity in a society where status was visible and extremely important. Now, let's move on to point 27, education in the Middle Ages. There weren't any mass public schools back then. Instead, monasteries and guilds were the main places for learning. For most people, especially peasants, formal education was basically non-existent. They picked up the skills they needed through hands-on experience at home and in the fields, taught by their parents and elders. Literacy was a rare privilege. For those who did get an education, it was closely tied to the church. Monasteries were the main keepers of knowledge. Monks copied and preserved ancient manuscripts, both religious and classical, in their scriptoria, and monasteries were centers for studying theology, philosophy, Latin, and to a lesser degree, math and astronomy. Children preparing for religious life, or noble kids, might be sent to monasteries for formal, rigorous education focused on faith and liturgy. Guilds, on the other hand, played a huge role in passing on practical and technical skills. A guild was an association of craftsmen working in the same trade: shoemakers, carpenters, blacksmiths, weavers, and so on. Education within guilds was organized through apprenticeships. A young apprentice would live and work with a master craftsman for several years, learning the trade from the ground up. After mastering the basics, they became a journeyman and could eventually create a masterpiece to prove their skills, earning the right to become a master and open their own workshop. This hands-on specialized education was crucial for the growth of medieval towns and the economy. Later in the late Middle Ages, the first universities appeared, higher education centers teaching theology, law, and medicine, though only accessible to a very small elite. So, while medieval education was limited in scope, it was essential for preserving knowledge and passing down important trades. Next up is point 28, superstitions and beliefs. The Middle Ages were steeped in magic, witchcraft, and a deep fear of the unknown, elements that shaped everyday life. Without modern science and with many natural events unexplained, people turned to supernatural explanations. They truly believed that spirits, demons, and angels influenced daily life. A bad harvest, sudden illness, or disaster might be seen as divine punishment, a curse, or dark magic at work. Magic wasn't just fantasy, it was thought to be a real force you could manipulate. There was white magic, connected to folk remedies or good luck blessings, and black magic linked to evil and witchcraft. Sorcerers and witches, though the large-scale witch hunts came later, were both feared and respected, believed capable of harm or wielding hidden powers. People consulted them for divination, finding lost items or casting spells. Fear of the unknown was constant. Forests were mysterious places full of strange creatures. Diseases were sent by God, and anything unexplained might have a supernatural cause. This fear showed up in beliefs about goblins, fairies, werewolves, and other mythical creatures in stories and popular imagination. To protect themselves, people used amulets, relics, prayers, and rituals. The Church, while condemning witchcraft and pagan practices, often absorbed some of these popular beliefs, like blessing fields or prayers against evil. So the line between faith, superstition, and magic was often blurred, shaping the medieval worldview. Now on to point 29, travel and trade routes. Traveling in the medieval world was dangerous but also full of opportunity. Travel wasn't like hopping in a car or train. Roads were rough, mostly muddy or dusty paths. People traveled on foot, horseback, or slow ox carts. Sea voyages depended on wind and currents and were risky due to storms and shipwrecks. Bandits and highwaymen lurked in forests and mountain passes, ready to attack travelers and caravans. That's why people traveled in groups and merchants hired armed guards. Disease spread quickly among travelers too. Crossing borders meant dealing with local customs officers, tolls, and sometimes hostile feudal lords. Infrastructure was minimal. Inns were rare and basic, and bridges and roads were often in poor shape or missing. Still, the opportunities were huge. Trade routes were the lifeblood of the medieval economy, connecting Europe to the Far East and North Africa. The Silk Road brought spices, silks, and luxury goods from Asia. Mediterranean and Baltic routes connected ports with products like salt, dried fish, timber, and furs. Merchants were key players carrying not just goods, but ideas, technologies, and cultures. Trade made cities like Venice, Genoa, and those in the Hanseatic League very wealthy. Annual fairs, like those in Champagne, France, were major hubs where merchants from across Europe gathered to buy and sell. So, while travel was risky, it was a driving force for change, wealth, and connection in the lively but dangerous medieval world. Finally, point 30, the role of the Church. In the Middle Ages, the Church wasn't just a spiritual institution, it was a huge political and social power. The Catholic Church was the most powerful and unified organization in Europe. Its spiritual authority was unquestioned by most people, from peasants to kings. People believed their soul's salvation depended on the Church, giving it immense influence over their lives. But its power went beyond religion. The Church was a major political player, owning vast lands and becoming one of the biggest landowners. Bishops and abbots often acted like feudal lords with armies and territories to govern. The Pope, as head of the Church, had the power to crown or excommunicate kings and emperors, putting him above many secular rulers. He issued laws called canon law, collected taxes, the tithe, and acted as a mediator in conflicts between kingdoms. Socially, the Church was the main provider of public services. Monasteries served as centers of charity, basic hospitals for the sick, hostels for travelers, and, as mentioned earlier, the only places for education and preserving knowledge. It was the primary institution offering comfort during times of plague, war, and famine. The Church shaped society's moral and ethical standards, influencing everything from marriage to commerce. So the Church not only guided souls toward heaven, but also stood as the backbone of the political, social, and cultural structure of the Middle Ages, a powerful force shaping every aspect of life. Now, let's tackle one of the most common questions about the Middle Ages, and a persistent myth. Did people really believe the earth was flat? What's myth and what's fact? The short answer is no. Educated people in the Middle Ages did not believe the earth was flat. This is one of the biggest historical myths that became popular later, especially in the 19th century, to make the medieval period look ignorant. Since ancient times, Greek philosophers like Aristotle and Ptolemy had already shown clear evidence that the earth was a sphere, based on observations like ships disappearing over the horizon, Earth's shadow during lunar eclipses, and changes in constellations when traveling. This knowledge was not lost during the Middle Ages. In fact, medieval scholars, both clergy and laypeople, knew and accepted that the earth was round. Texts like Thomas Aquinas's Summa Theologica and the works of the Venerable Bede discussed the earth's roundness without any doubt. Medieval maps often showed the earth as a disc or oval, but that was an artistic choice or projection, not a belief that the earth was flat. The idea that Columbus had to fight against flat earth believers is a later invention. The real debate Columbus had with scholars was not about the earth's shape, but about its size. Columbus mistakenly thought the earth was much smaller than it actually is, which made him believe Asia was much closer by crossing the Atlantic. Scholars, using better calculations, knew the trip would be far longer and more dangerous than Columbus expected. So the truth is that medieval views of the world were pretty advanced for their time, and the flat earth myth is a great example of how history can get twisted. Now let's move on to point 32, technological advances. Far from being stuck in the past, the Middle Ages saw key innovations that transformed farming, industry, and daily life. Standouts include watermills and windmills, the heavy plow, and horseshoes. Energy use made big strides. Watermills, which already existed in ancient times, became super common in the Middle Ages. Windmills, totally a medieval invention, changed the game. These mills didn't just grind grain into flour, they also crushed ore, processed cloth, and sawed wood. They cleverly harnessed natural energy, saving humans and animals from backbreaking work and boosting productivity. In farming, the heavy moldboard plow was a game changer. Roman plows were light and barely scratched the soil. The heavy plow, with its iron blade and moldboard, could turn the soil deeply. This was key for the heavy, wet soils of northern Europe, greatly improving crop yields and opening new lands for farming. Its use was a cornerstone of the medieval agricultural revolution. Horseshoes were another simple but huge advance. Iron shoes protected horses' hooves, letting them work longer and on tougher ground without injury. Together with the collar harness, which stopped horses from choking, horses became way more efficient than oxen for many farm and transport jobs, increasing speed and how much they could carry. These inventions show that the Middle Ages were a time of practical creativity, setting the stage for future tech breakthroughs. Next, point 33, clocks and time. Before mechanical clocks and long before pocket watches, how did people tell time in the Middle Ages? They used a clever system based on nature and simple tools. The main daytime timekeeper was the sundial. Sundials had been around since ancient times and were widely used. A rod or gnomon cast a shadow on a surface marked with hours, letting people estimate the time. Of course, sundials only worked when the sun was out. At night or on cloudy days, people used water clocks or clepsydras. These measured time by water flowing steadily from one container to another. Water clocks were most common in monasteries or places needing more precise and continuous time measurement. Hourglasses were also used to measure specific intervals, like an hour or half hour, by sand flowing from one chamber to another. They were portable and handy for timing things like sermons or guard shifts. But the most influential way to keep time daily, especially in the early Middle Ages, was the canonical hours marked by monastery and church bells. The monastic day was split into 8 prayer times: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. The bells rang to call monks to each prayer. Their sound echoed through nearby villages, helping peasants and artisans organize their workdays around these signals. While not as precise as modern clocks, these methods were good enough to coordinate farming, religious, and social life. It wasn't until the late Middle Ages, around the 1300s, that mechanical clocks started appearing in big cities, usually in bell towers and church spires, revolutionizing how people thought about and measured time. Now let's turn to point 34. Construction in the Middle Ages. We'll explore imposing castles, majestic cathedrals, and the amazing techniques behind these architectural feats. The Middle Ages were a time of incredible engineering and architecture. Castles weren't just fancy homes. They were military fortresses built with impressive defensive designs. They evolved from simple wooden motte and bailey towers into complex stone structures with concentric walls, flanking towers, moats, drawbridges, and machicolations. Building a castle required a huge workforce, skilled engineers and craftsmen, and a deep understanding of materials and siege tactics. But if anything defines medieval architecture, it's the Gothic cathedrals. These massive structures, which took centuries to finish, were true engineering marvels. Their impressive techniques included the innovative use of the pointed ogival arch, which allowed vaults to distribute weight more efficiently and reach heights that the Roman semicircular arch couldn't. Flying buttresses, external supports that counteracted the vault's pressure, relieved walls of much of their load, making it possible to have huge stained glass windows that flooded the interiors with light and color. Besides these masterpieces, medieval construction also included stone bridges, city walls, and public buildings. The work involved deep hands-on knowledge of stonemasonry, complex scaffolding, pulleys, manual cranes, and highly skilled crews, from master masons to carpenters and blacksmiths. Often these skills were passed down secretly within builders' guilds, giving them an almost mystical reputation. So medieval construction, far from being primitive, was actually a time of innovation and ambition that left behind architectural wonders still stunning today. Now let's move on to point 35, lighting. In the Middle Ages, daily life was ruled by the sun. When it set, people relied on very limited light sources like candles and torches. Daylight was their main resource. Houses and castles were designed to maximize natural light through windows. though early on these windows were small to keep out cold and maintain security. But once the sun went down, darkness was almost total, and life slowed way down. Torches were common for lighting big hallways, castle rooms, and for traveling at night. Made of wood or rags soaked in resin or tar, they gave off bright light, but also a lot of smoke and soot, and were always a fire risk. They weren't good for reading or delicate tasks. Candles were the main indoor light source. Tallow candles made from animal fat were the cheapest and most common, but smelled bad, flickered, burned fast, and gave off little light. Beeswax candles burned cleaner and brighter, but were expensive, so only nobles and the church could usually afford them. Because artificial lighting was limited, most social and work activities happened during daylight hours. People went to bed early and woke with the sun. Reading and writing required focus and were usually done during the day or with good quality candles. Nightlife as we know it barely existed for most people. So light availability didn't just affect vision. It shaped medieval habits, customs, and daily rhythms. Next, point 36, weapons and armor. These weren't just for fighting, but the result of constant improvements focused on practicality. The Middle Ages were a time of non-stop innovation in defense and offense. Early on, armor was basic, mostly chainmail, which was made of interlinked metal rings over padded cloth, and simple helmets. Over time, chainmail got more advanced and was paired with hardened leather pieces. By the late Middle Ages, plate armor became dominant. The fully articulated 15th century plate armor, designed to deflect blows, was a masterpiece that gave unmatched protection while still allowing decent mobility. It was extremely expensive and made by specialist armorers. Weapons evolved too. The sword was the noble weapon of choice, a symbol of status and chivalry. Medieval swords ranged from one-handed blades to long swords and great swords, each suited to different fighting styles. Shields changed in shape and size, from large kite shields to small bucklers. But weapons went beyond swords. Battle axes, maces, and war hammers were brutal against heavy armor. The English longbow and crossbow revolutionized ranged combat. The longbow needed great strength and practice, but could shoot arrows with deadly power over long distances. The crossbow was easier to use and fired bolts that could pierce chainmail. Finally, the arrival of gunpowder weapons in the late Middle Ages, like early cannons and arquebuses, slowly changed warfare and signaled the end of the armored knight. Functionality was key. Every piece of armor and weapon was designed to maximize protection or damage on an ever-changing battlefield. Now on to point 37, books and literacy. In the Middle Ages, a codex was extremely valuable, and being able to read was a privilege for very few. The printing press didn't exist, so every book was a painstakingly hand-copied manuscript. Codices, these bound books, were real works of art. They were made in monasteries by monk scribes who spent years copying religious, philosophical, or historical texts. The process was slow, and vellum, treated animal skin, was costly. Inks came from natural pigments, and letters were often decorated with intricate illustrations and gold leaf, creating the famous miniatures and illuminations. One codex could cost as much as property or a whole herd of animals. Its value was cultural and spiritual as much as monetary. Because of the high cost and effort, literacy was very low among the general population. Most peasants and common folk were illiterate, learning their trades and morals through oral tradition, church art, and sermons. Reading was mostly limited to the clergy, monks, priests, and bishops, who needed to study scripture and liturgy. Some nobles, especially those in administrative roles or with cultural interests, also learned to read. Many people preferred to have books read aloud, but town clerks, notaries, and merchants keeping accounts developed reading and writing skills. So books weren't mass-produced goods. but treasured items kept in monastic libraries or private collections. Access to that knowledge was a clear sign of power and status. Now let's look at point 38, maps and navigation. In the Middle Ages, finding your way in a huge, often unknown world was a tough challenge, and their methods were clever but very different from ours. Medieval maps, called mappa mundi, weren't precise navigation tools like today. They mostly served theological or symbolic purposes rather than giving accurate geography. Medieval maps were typically circular, with Jerusalem right at the center in the east, believed to be where Eden was, at the top. They showed the known world through a Christian lens, mixing geography with biblical history and legend. These maps weren't made for plotting exact routes, but to illustrate the cosmos and human history. On land, people navigated using natural landmarks, rivers, mountains, coasts, and familiar towns. Experienced travelers relied on the sun during the day and the stars, especially the North Star, at night. There were also route maps or itineraries, lists of places and distances, often with verbal descriptions of roads and dangers. Pilgrims and merchants leaned heavily on these guides and local knowledge. At sea, navigation was more advanced. Portolan charts, detailed coastal maps with rum lines showing directions, were surprisingly accurate for their time and based on real observations. Mariners also used the magnetic compass, brought over from China in the late Middle Ages, which revolutionized their ability to stay on course. Other tools included the astrolabe for measuring latitude by the stars, and the hourglass for estimating time, and thus distance traveled. So while they didn't have modern cartography, medieval people combined first-hand knowledge, early technology, and collective memory to find their way. Now, to wrap up this section, we get to point 39, the power of writing. In the Middle Ages, writing was a powerful, specialized skill that laid the groundwork for modern bureaucracy, with scribes and documents at its core. Unlike today's widespread literacy, writing was an art and a highly valued, restricted skill. Scribes were the pros of the written word. In the early medieval period, most scribes were monks working in scriptoria, dedicating their lives to copying religious, historical, and classical texts. They were the keepers of knowledge and tasked with preserving written culture. But as society grew more complex, especially from the late Middle Ages onward, with cities and trade booming, the need for writing went beyond monasteries. Lay scribes appeared, working for royalty, nobility, merchants, and guilds. They became essential for administration, law, and commerce. Documents became key tools. Royal letters, land grants, marriage contracts, wills, sales records, trade agreements, and court records were all written down. A document sealed with wax was legal proof of an agreement or right, much more reliable than oral memory. This growing dependence on writing and documents to manage states, property, and commerce paved the way for bureaucracy. Kingdoms and cities needed organized systems to record taxes, laws, court rulings, and diplomatic dealings. This led to offices staffed by people dedicated to paperwork and administration, a forerunner of modern government and civil service. Power wasn't just in the sword anymore. It was increasingly in the pen and parchment. Next up is point 40, tools of the trade. To understand a medieval craftsman's life, it's important to know the tools that, though basic by today's standards, were the foundation of his skill and work. Unlike factory production later on, the medieval economy relied on manual labor and individual expertise. Each craftsman, carpenter, blacksmith, shoemaker, weaver, mason, jeweler, had a specific set of tools. These weren't mass-produced but often made by local smiths or even the craftsmen themselves, making them valuable, durable tools passed down through generations. For example, a carpenter used axes to cut and shape wood, hand saws to cut, planes to smooth surfaces, gouges and chisels to carve and join, plus hammers, nails, and compasses for precision. Each tool had a purpose and required skill. For the blacksmith, the anvil and hammer were the heart of the workshop. With these, and tongs, chisels, and bellows to stoke the fire, he shaped iron into everything from horseshoes and farm tools to weapons and armor. The mason, crucial to building cathedrals and castles, worked with mallets, chisels of all sizes, plumb bobs and squares to shape large stones. The precision of his work was key to the strength of these huge structures. These tools, made of iron, wood, or leather, carried centuries of experience and adaptation. Without engines or electricity, the craftsman's strength and know-how were essential. Tools didn't just help get the job done. They defined a craftsman's trade and status within his guild and community. They were extensions of his hands, turning raw materials into the essential objects that supported medieval society. Finally, for our last point here, point 41, we'll clear up some common myths. Let's talk about debunked legends, torture, chastity belts, and other stories that have unfairly stained the image of the Middle Ages. First, torture. While torture did exist, especially in legal settings to get confessions, it wasn't as widespread or as cruel as people often imagine. The brutal, elaborate torture devices you see in movies and TV, like the Iron Maiden or the Pear of Anguish, are mostly inventions from the 15th, 16th, or even 19th centuries. Medieval torture was more basic and used carefully, since forced confessions weren't always trusted and other evidence was often needed. It wasn't a daily mass practice tool. Next, the infamous chastity belt. This is probably one of the most stubborn myths, and to many people's surprise, it's totally false. There's no solid historical, legal, or archaeological proof that chastity belts were used, whether widely or even occasionally, during the Middle Ages. The examples you sometimes see are Victorian fakes, products of 19th century fascination with the medieval period and a taste for weird or creepy objects for private collections and museums. The story of a husband leaving for the Crusades and locking up his wife is a later romantic and frankly misogynistic fantasy. Other myths include the idea that people were filthy, that medieval medicine was just bloodletting and prayer, or that there were no cultural or technological advances. In fact, the opposite is true. Many of these distortions started during the Renaissance and Enlightenment, which aimed to cast themselves as eras of light, contrasting with the supposedly dark, ignorant, and barbaric Middle Ages. It's important to remember that the Middle Ages was a long, complex period, with a lot of variation across time and place. It can't just be boiled down to cliches and exaggerations. Busting these myths helps us see the era in a fairer, more accurate light. Now, let's talk about point 42, people's height. Were medieval folks shorter than we tend to think? Generally, yes. Archaeological and anthropological studies of skeletal remains show that average height in the Middle Ages was noticeably less than it is today. For men, average heights were usually between about 5'3" and 5'7", 1.60 to 170 meters. For women, it was shorter, around 4'11" to 5'1", 150 to 1.55 meters. That's quite different from modern averages in many places, where men are often taller than 5'7", and women over 5'3". The main reason for this difference was nutrition. Despite some advances in farming, medieval diets, especially for common folks, were often limited and lacked key nutrients. Famines happened regularly, and childhood illnesses that affected bone growth were common. Proper growth needs steady access to enough calories and protein, something not guaranteed back then. Plus, tough living conditions, hard physical work from a young age, and constant exposure to diseases without modern medicine also held people back physically. The nobility, with better food, tended to be a bit taller than peasants, but the gap wasn't huge. So yes, walking through a medieval village or town, most people would have been shorter than what we're used to seeing today. Next up, point 43, interesting names. In the Middle Ages, nicknames were way more common and descriptive than we usually realize, and they played a big role in how surnames developed. Early on, most people didn't have fixed last names like we do now. They were known by their first name, like John, Mary, or William, and if needed, a descriptor was added to tell them apart from others with the same name. That's where nicknames came in. These nicknames were often pretty straightforward and sometimes blunt, based on things like physical traits, jobs where someone was from, or even personality quirks. For example, someone might be John the Fat, Mary the Smith, Peter of the River, or William the Bold. These nicknames could stay in the family or change over a person's life. As populations grew and society got more complex, especially from the 11th century on, people needed more permanent ways to identify themselves. That's when these nicknames started turning into fixed family names. So Juan, son of Pedro, became Juan Perez, the "es" meaning son of, and Guillermo del Bosque became Guillermo del Bosque or Just Bosque. Ricardo the baker became Ricardo Panadero. Surnames also came from places like Burgos or Montes, from jobs like Herrero or Tejedor, from physical traits like Moreno or Rubio, or from patronymics like Rodriguez or Fernandez. This process took centuries and didn't happen evenly across Europe, but many modern surnames started as these colorful medieval nicknames. Now, point 44, where common phrases come from. It's pretty amazing how many everyday expressions we use today actually come from medieval life and customs. Here are a few examples. To be saved by a hair. This phrase has a literal medieval origin. When a ship was sinking, one desperate way to save someone falling overboard was to grab them by the hair if they had long hair. It also applied to knights falling off horses in battle, who could be saved from a fatal hit if someone grabbed their mane sticking out from under their helmet to find your other half. This popular phrase about love and soulmates comes from the Platonic idea that humans were once whole spheres, split into two halves by the gods. Medieval romantic literature picked up and popularized this idea, where true love was seen as reuniting with your lost half. To be on a tightrope, meaning to be in a risky or dangerous spot. This phrase comes straight from medieval fairs where acrobats and tightrope walkers literally performed on a tightrope, always at risk of falling. To open the season. Nowadays, this means starting any activity, but it originally referred to hunting. In the Middle Ages, the Veda was a closed season when hunting was banned to let animal populations recover. To open the season meant lifting the ban and allowing hunting again. To cut to the healthy. This phrase means taking drastic action to solve a problem at its root. It comes from medieval medicine and barber practices. When a wound or limb was badly infected and nothing else worked, they amputated, cutting into healthy tissue to stop the infection and save the patient's life. To have a wide sleeve. This means to be flexible or lenient. Back then, wide sleeves were a symbol of status and wealth, associated with loose clothing that allowed more freedom of movement and, figuratively, more freedom in action. Someone with a wide sleeve enjoyed more chances or greater freedom. These are just a few phrases that, like echoes from the past, still shape our everyday language, showing how deeply the Middle Ages influenced our culture. Now let's dive into point 45, medieval music. Far from dull, this era was full of instruments and styles that laid the groundwork for Western music. Music was a big part of medieval life, present both in religious ceremonies and in entertainment. In churches and monasteries, Gregorian chant was the main style, a vocal single melodic line without instruments used for worship. Its beauty came from its purity and its ability to lift the spirit. Over time, it developed into polyphony, where multiple voices sang different melodies at the same time. As for instruments, they were pretty diverse and often adapted from ancient ones or brought in from other cultures, especially the Islamic world. Some of the most common included the flute, made from wood or bone and used in different forms, the lute, a plucked string instrument similar to a guitar or mandolin, which came to Europe from the Arab world and became really popular in both courtly and folk music. The harp, used since ancient times and favored by bards and troubadours to accompany their songs. The vielle or fiddle, considered the forerunner of the violin and used for melodies and drones. The hurdy-gurdy, a string instrument played by turning a wooden wheel with a crank and pressing keys. Trumpets and horns, mainly used for military signals, ceremonies and celebrations rather than complex tunes. And percussion instruments, like drums, tambourines, and simple cymbals, that kept the rhythm for dances and festive music. Musical styles were mostly split between religious music, starting with plainchant and later developing into sacred polyphony, and secular music. Secular tunes were performed by troubadours, trouvères, and minnesingers, poet musicians who composed songs about courtly love, chivalry, war, and everyday life. While we don't have recordings from the time, illuminated manuscripts and music treatises give us a glimpse of the rich sounds of the Middle Ages, a period that was crucial for the development of the music we know today. Now let's dive into one of the rawest and most fascinating parts of medieval life: justice. Point 46 covers ordeals, trial by combat, and the punishments that shaped the legal system of the era. Medieval justice was very different from ours, often based on faith and belief that God would intervene. Ordeals were tests given to an accused person to decide guilt or innocence, with the belief that God would protect the innocent. There were several types. The ordeal of hot iron, where the accused held a red-hot iron and their innocence was judged by how well the burn healed in 3 days. The ordeal of cold water, where the accused was tied up and thrown into a blessed pond. Floating meant guilty, sinking meant innocent, though it often meant drowning. And the ordeal of bread and cheese, where it was believed a guilty person would choke on the food. These methods, though they seem brutal now, were seen as unavoidable divine judgments. Trial by combat or judicial duels was another way to find the truth, especially in noble disputes or matters of honor. The parties or their chosen champions fought in single combat. People believed God would grant victory to the just side, and the winner's side was considered right. Once guilt was proven, punishments varied and could be harsh. Minor crimes could mean fines, whipping, public humiliation like the pillory or stocks, or being kicked out of the community. Serious crimes like theft or treason carried tougher penalties. The orca, a kind of punishment, was common for robbery and other offenses. Executions were sometimes public and meant to warn others. Mutilation, like cutting off a hand for theft, was also used. Prison wasn't really a punishment like today, but more a holding place before trial or for debtors. So medieval justice, while deeply religious, didn't hesitate to use extreme methods to keep order and maintain faith in divine justice. Moving on to point 47, we explore the stark contrast between urban and rural life in the Middle Ages. About 90% of the population lived in the countryside, their lives tightly connected to the land and farming cycles. Life on the farm meant constant hard work, depending on weather and harvests. The diet was plain, mostly cereals and beans. Homes were simple and often shared with animals to stay warm in winter. Communities were small and isolated, with contact mainly limited to the local lord, church, and neighbors. Challenges included famines, plagues, serfdom, and little access to education or medical care. In contrast, medieval cities, though smaller than today's, were centers of trade, crafts, and government. People worked in specialized trades within guilds, creating a more diverse economy. City dwellers had more personal freedom, hence the saying, "The air of the city makes you free," and more chances to move up socially. Access to goods and services was better, and cultural life was lively with markets, fairs, and a mix of people from different backgrounds. But urban life had its downsides too. Cities were crowded and often dirty. Poor sanitation, like filthy streets and chamber pots dumped out windows, helped diseases spread. Fires were a constant risk due to wooden buildings packed close together. The noise, smells, and crowds could be overwhelming. Social inequality was clear, with rich and poor neighborhoods sharply divided. So while rural life offered stability tied to the land but with hard, repetitive work, urban life promised freedom and opportunity, but came with problems like filth and overcrowding. Together they made up the complex fabric of medieval society. Finally, at point 48, we look at guilds, one of the most important medieval urban institutions. Guilds were the backbone of the craft economy, organizing labor through a hierarchy of masters, apprentices, and strict rules. Guilds were groups of artisans in the same trade: carpenters, blacksmiths, weavers, bakers, shoemakers, and more. Their goals were to protect members' interests, control product quality, regulate competition, and train new artisans. Work in a guild followed a clear structure. Apprentices were young people learning a trade. They lived with the master, who provided food, lodging, and, most importantly, taught the trade's basics over several years, often 5 to 10 or more. Apprenticeship was a serious, formal commitment. Journeymen or day laborers. After finishing their apprenticeship, they became journeymen. They no longer lived with the master and started earning wages for their work. Journeymen were skilled artisans, but they didn't yet have their own workshops. Many spent years, sometimes their whole lives, working for different masters to refine their skills and, in some cases, to save money. Masters. To become a master, a journeyman had to prove his skill by creating a masterpiece, a top-quality piece of craftsmanship, showing mastery in every aspect of the trade. If the guild approved the work, the journeyman was promoted to master, which allowed him to open his own workshop, hire apprentices and journeymen, and sell his products directly. Guilds set strict rules about material quality, production methods, prices, and even working hours. This kept standards high and prevented unfair competition. They also acted as support networks, helping members who were sick and assisting widows and orphans. So guilds were not just economic organizations. They were social and educational centers that shaped urban life and work culture in the Middle Ages. Now we come to point 49, art and symbolism. Medieval art wasn't just decoration. It was packed with hidden meanings and powerful messages, acting as a visual language for a mostly illiterate population. Whether in grand cathedrals, delicate illuminated manuscripts, or detailed sculptures, medieval art served mainly didactic and religious purposes. It wasn't made just for beauty, but to glorify God, teach scripture, remind people of moral lessons, and often inspire both fear and devotion. Symbolism was everywhere. Every figure, color, animal, or even the placement of elements carried multiple layers of meaning. Blue could stand for divinity or truth. Red might mean passion or martyrdom. Green symbolized hope or renewal. Animals like lions represented Christ as the Lion of Judah or as a predator. Serpents symbolized sin, and doves stood for the Holy Spirit. Figures and gestures had meaning too. Raised hands meant prayer, a finger pointing upward signified divine inspiration, and halos showed holiness or religious importance. Stained glass windows in cathedrals acted as the poor man's Bible, telling biblical stories step by step. Sculptures on the buildings often illustrated the Last Judgment or saints' lives. Even the architecture had symbolism. The cruciform, cross-shaped layout of churches represented Christ's body. Light streaming through Gothic windows was seen as divine light, illuminating the soul. The artists, often anonymous and working under church direction, were craftsmen who used these symbols to communicate complex ideas to a population that couldn't read texts but could understand images and their deep religious and moral meanings. This visual language united communities in a shared worldview. Finally, we reach point 50. The medieval legacy. It's easy to think of the Middle Ages as a distant, strange past, but its influence is still all around us, often without us realizing it. Take cities, for example. Many major European cities, and by extension those in Latin America, originated as medieval settlements with their layouts, names, and iconic monuments like cathedrals, castles, and city walls dating back to that era. The concept of the city as a hub for commerce and social life was really established in the Middle Ages. Our educational institutions also trace back to this period. Modern universities were born in the Middle Ages. Ideas like faculties, academic degrees, bachelor's, master's, doctorate, and organized student life started in places like Bologna, Paris, and Oxford. The modern legal system, especially in continental Europe, was heavily influenced by the rediscovery and study of Roman law during the Middle Ages, along with the development of canon law. Concepts of justice, property rights, and contracts that we rely on today took shape during those centuries. As we've already seen with common phrases, the Middle Ages left a clear mark on language. Much of our vocabulary, the structure of Romance and Germanic languages, and many expressions come directly from that time. Western Christianity, with its hierarchy and celebrations, also solidified during this era. Medieval aesthetics, music, and philosophy continue to influence culture, art, and theology today. Even technology and agriculture benefited. The heavy plow, water, and windmills, and crop rotation set the stage for future advances. Guild organization was a forerunner to modern professional associations and quality control. In short, the Middle Ages weren't just a dark chapter in history. They were a crucible where many of the ideas, structures, and cultural elements defining Western civilization were formed. Their legacy lives on in our cities, schools, laws, language, religion, and how we understand the world. I hope this journey through 50 medieval curiosities has been enlightening and helped you see this fascinating era in a new light. Is there any other aspect of the Middle Ages you'd like to explore?